A little bit of background. The meetup was started by me, Ivo Everts, and my colleague Kiki van Leeuwen when we were working at GoDataDriven. GoDataDriven is a big data and data science consultancy firm in the Netherlands. And it is our mission to sort of spread the word of using data and AI in healthcare and do more of that and improve healthcare as such. And we did a lot of projects as a result of this with a couple of hospitals in the Netherlands and companies associated to the medical field. And we did all sorts of things. We did consultancy, organized hackathons, meetups, and all that, just like today. Kiki is now doing a PhD at Radboud UMC. It's all about applying AI in radiology, which is of course one of the biggest drivers in this field. And I am currently a consulting data scientist at Mobiquity, which is a global digital consultancy with a special interest in healthcare. And to sort of conclude this name-dropping section, we are now partnering up with deeplearning.ai, which is a global organization also spreading the word on data and AI. And then partnering up with us to sort of expand their reach in the Netherlands, and of course for us to expand our reach across the globe, which is reflected by the large number of participants that we are welcoming today. So thank you all for joining. It's really exciting for us. And also exciting is that we can still drop another name, a new name for us, which is the LUMC. And for that, I'm going to give the word to Marjolein.
Yes, thank you, Ivo. Very warm welcome to everyone to this meetup from the LUMC and especially from the LUMC CAIRELab. Very happy to see the amount of participants and especially the variety of participants, different hospitals, doctors, data scientists, amongst their international guests. So happy to welcome you here. My name is Marjolein Elderhorst. I'm the manager of the value-based healthcare and AI team here at the LUMC in Leiden. In this role, I have the big privilege to work with very talented data scientists and PhD candidates, and in order with them, together, of course, with doctors, to implement valuable and responsible AI into healthcare. I'm also in the lead of the LUMC CAIRELab. And before we start with the meetup and the great speakers, I just want to spend a few minutes on explaining what the CAIRELab initiative is about. Well, CAIRELab is the LUMC organization-wide initiative where we bring together different experts, project leads related to AI in order together to bring AI into practice and actually accelerating the road from responsible AI research into this valuable implementation into clinical practice. What we see, it's not easy to do, that not a lot of AI is currently implemented yet into the clinic, and that is our aim and drive. And we do that by bridging the gap, or if I put it a bit nicely, find opportunities between the field of medicine and data science. We develop, we co-create, or we buy valuable AI models, and we learn how to implement them into practice. We create the right IT infrastructure, and also we're working on the roadblocks along the way, meaning law regulations, ethics, privacy, security issues, and as well as validation of the AI models that we bought. But moreover, and very important to us, is the scientific research we do to the valuable and responsible AI implementations. And key to this approach is the cooperation with doctors, with other hospitals, that we learn and share knowledge, and of course we have great fun. And that's a good match with this meetup of today, I guess. Cooperation, we see doctors and data scientists, Radboud, LUMC, different speakers, and hopefully we also have some fun coming hour. If you want to know some more about CAIRELab, please join us at our website or email so we can get in touch. But for now, have a nice meetup.
Thank you, Marjolein. So let's have some fun indeed. To start with Bas de Groot from the LUMC. I'm going to stop sharing my screen and kindly request Bas to share his screen. That looks good. So if you can unmute yourself, the floor is all yours, Bas.
Thank you very much, Ivo. I will start my slides. Yeah, thank you very much for the introduction. In the next 15 minutes or so, I will tell you about potential application of machine learning in the emergency department. We want to predict hospitalization of ED patients with either machine learning techniques or regression, conventional regression techniques. And I am very glad to be able to work with all the people listed on this slide, who all contributed to the study. But most importantly, I would like to mention the name of Anne de Hond, who's a data scientist working at the Department of Value-Based Artificial Intelligence in the LUMC. And Wouter Rave, who's working as a emergency physician at the Department of Emergency Medicine. And they did most of the work of this study I'm going to present. So why should we try to predict hospital admission of ED patients? Well, we know from responses on questionnaires we received back from our patients that patients hate waiting. And if your organization values patient-centeredness, patient satisfaction, and hospitality, this is something to take into account. More importantly, we know from many studies that there's a strong connection between emergency department length of stay and the problem of ED overcrowding. And ED overcrowding is a situation, as you can see here on this slide, where the demand of care exceeds the capacity. And it's well known from literature that ED overcrowding is a threat for patient safety, quality of care, patient satisfaction, but also satisfaction of medical personnel. So this is a situation you really want to prevent, because otherwise accidents will happen and patients will die. So how can we reduce emergency department length of stay? Before I explain that, I need to tell you a little bit more about the logistics in an emergency department. In the emergency department, we tend to use a model using input of patients, which you can see here. For example, does a patient come in with ambulance or via the general practitioner? Then there's the throughput of patients, where the patients actually treated and assessed. And there is an output of patients to either a hospital ward or maybe the patient is discharged home. On average, the ED length of stay is 2.5 hours in Dutch emergency departments. And during those 2.5 hours, the following happens. A patient is registered, a patient is triaged. That means an urgency level is put on the patients. For example, a patient with chest pain has a higher urgency than a patient with an ankle sprain. Then the patient is either put back in a waiting room or directly put into an ED treatment room, where he's assessed by a nurse and then by a physician. The physician often requests some laboratory testing or some radiology testing. He has to wait on those results after he did some history taking, a physical examination, things like that. And if the patient really has a complex problem, often another doctor is consulted. And the patient also needs to be seen by those other doctors. And then at the end, decision can be made. And that can be either discharge the patient home or admit the patient to the hospital. Well, approximately 25% of the ED patients have an ED length of stay for longer than 4 hours, which is far too long, because this whole process could be done in approximately 2 hours. And if a patient has to wait another 2 hours or even more, this does not add value for the patient and has these detrimental effects I just mentioned. So we want to predict the hospital admission, which has, if you can do that early, so somewhere here, you can, this has several advantages. First of all, you can initialize the hospitalization process parallel to the whole ED assessment, which will save time. Secondly, patients can anticipate on what's going to happen. And of course, this is important because they can inform family, they can arrange a toothbrush and some clothing, very simple things. But, well, for all of you who has ever been stuck on an airport because his flight was cancelled and you don't know how long delay there is, it's nice to know what is going on and what will happen to you. And finally, and maybe also very important, is that it has prognostic value. So the patients who will be admitted are the sickest patients, so the one with the highest probability to die, but probably also the patients who have the largest benefit of time-sensitive ED treatments, for example, fluid resuscitation in sepsis patients. And when doctors and nurses realize very early in their time course that this patient needs aggressive treatment, this may also be beneficial for the outcome of the patient. So to hospitalize or not, that's the question. And it's only the first simple question which will be handled here. And I will tell you a little bit more later on. But can we use machine learning for that question? Unfortunately, some recent systematic reviews and studies have shown that machine learning is not the holy grail. And in some cases, it's even so that logistic regression has better predictive performance than machine learning algorithms. So before we do all the efforts and implement things, we have to answer this very basic question. To this end, we use data of the NEED, and the NEED stands for the Netherlands Emergency Department Evaluation Database. This NEED has been founded by emergency physicians, members of the Dutch Society of Emergency Physicians, but it is an independent foundation and the Dutch Quality Registration for Emergency Departments. The NEED provides the opportunity for data scientists and doctors and nurses to solve issues, problems, questions in the emergency department. And this is necessary because most doctors and nurses will not have any knowledge about machine learning algorithms or how to develop them. And most data scientists will often not have the clinical problems or the clinical questions and need the data to develop the machine learning algorithms. So I'm very glad that we created a win-win situation with the Department of Value-Based Artificial Intelligence and CAIRELab, and hope this will result in some future collaborations as well. So which hospitals participate in the NEED? Those are listed on this slide, but for the present study we used only data of 3 hospitals representing 180,000 patients with approximately 100 variables per patient, and because the other hospitals did not yet finish their automatic coupling between their hospital information system and the NEED, somewhere at the end of this year all the hospitals will be in the NEED and all the data of the hospitals. So what is registered in the need and what is used for this study? Well, there are some general characteristics of participating EDs, for example, the location of the ED in the Netherlands, but also how many emergency physicians or trauma surgeons are working in the ED. Secondly, we have a lot of patient characteristics, which are summarized here. So from the pre-hospital phase, we know things about their referral status, how did they arrive to the hospital, for example, by ambulance or by own transport. And these information already has a lot of prognostic properties in themselves. There are patient-rated characteristics, the demographics, triage category, so does the urgency of the patient problem, the presenting complaint, for example, does a patient come to the emergency department with abdominal pain or chest pain? We measured the vital signs and we did some diagnostic testing, which is also in the need. ED treatment variables were registered in the need, for example, how many oxygen did they receive, how many fluids, and of course, emergency department length of stay. Then we measure a lot of outcomes, but for this study, we used the outcome disposition to either award ICU or if the patient was sent home. There are some more data collected in the need, but these are not relevant for the present study. So what would we do? We developed various prediction models with either a logistic regression analysis, of which I know a lot, but also with some machine learning algorithms, of which I hardly have any knowledge. And they are random forest models, XGBoost, and deep neural networks. And this may be for some of you important to mention. The advantage of logistic regression is that it's very easy to interpret. You know what you are doing. Doctors can understand this. And when you go to the deep neural networks, it's very difficult to interpret. It's difficult to understand what is going on in the model, what are you doing, which may be a problem for the acceptability of those algorithms, because doctors don't tend to believe computers that easy. The advantage is that when you go this direction, the models become much more flexible. So what did we find? In terms of area under the curves or receiver operator characteristics, you can see that here. We created the regression models for the machine learning algorithms and the logistic regression analysis at 3 time points after ED registration. And first at triage, so somewhere at the first 15 minutes, then after 30 minutes. The advantage here is that the patient has been put in an ED treatment room and the vital signs are known because the patient is put on a monitor. We know whether or not the nurse draws some blood, things like that. And after 2 hours, we also have the blood test results and the radiology results and some more variables. So the more you go in this direction, the more information you can put in your model. But of course, and that's the trade-off, you have to wait longer, so the potential time saving is less. So we prefer a model somewhere here. Well, you can, I think, easily see that there is not a large difference between the machine learning models and the logistic regression. And what you can also see, and that counts for the discriminative performance, as assessed by the area under the curve. But you can also see that the calibration is excellent for all models, but not much different between the machine learning algorithms and the logistic regression model. You can see a little bit more clearly here. Make sure you understand this y-axis starting at 0.78. But you can see here that within one time frame, the regression models and the machine learning models have similar prognostic performance. But you can also see that the more information you put in your model, the better the predictive performance. And that brings me to the conclusion of my presentation. And it is first that early prediction of hospitalization could contribute to shorter ED length of stay, patient safety and patient satisfaction, and early risk stratification of ED patients. Secondly, machine learning algorithms have similar discriminated performance as conventional logistic regression, at least in the dataset we used. And there is better predictive performance with more information in the model. And I have later time to answer the questions, but I have a few things which I can already add to a potential discussion. Developing the model is just the first simple question. And much more complex steps, as has also already been mentioned by Marjolein, will follow if you want to introduce or implement these models in your ED. And a few questions we had is, would it be better to have more patients because you can maybe then better predict? Is a model better than clinical judgment? Is also an important question, I think, or can we combine the two? Is there maybe better predictive performance in specific patient groups, for example, in sepsis patients, which is a very important subgroup of patients in the emergency department? So I will answer questions later, and I thank you very much for your attention, and I will give the word back to Ivo.
Thank you, Bas, for your nice presentation. Indeed, if you have questions, I already saw one coming in, please hit the Q&A button, and we will get back to it later. For now, I would like to give the word to Michelle and Katarina. So if you would be so kind to share your screen and unmute yourself, then we will listen to you.
That one, exactly. Share. Yeah.
Yes. Well, thank you very much for the kind introduction. So I'll be talking about AI in clinical neurology and focusing on particular applications. Now, hopefully, at this moment, the process illustrated on the video on the left side is presently going on in the brains of the participants. Shown are two neurons exchanging information, and the light that the blobs represent the intraneuronal calcium, which is a signal that is released just before neurotransmitters are released. So this is basically what neurons do all day, and exchanging information, essential for learning and memory. And essentially, as Inas once said, neurons are like people in a social network. They basically chat all day. Oops. I think I need this. Yes. So the interesting part is that part of this communication of neurons, in particular the neurons in the cortex, as illustrated here, can be recorded with an EEG, an electroencephalogram, and that signal basically represents.
Michelle, sorry to interrupt.
Yes.
Your voice is going up and down all the time. Is it possible to be a bit closer to the computer, maybe, that we can hear you a bit better?
I will try. Is this
yes, this is a lot better already. Yeah.
Okay, I'm bending forwards a little bit towards the computer. That's okay. Thank you. So the EEG essentially reflects this communication between the neurons, in particular the neurons in the cortex. And as this communication is extremely vulnerable and affected in many diseases, the EEG indeed is a very valuable method in the clinic as a readout for various neurological disorders. And this is a gallery of EEG epochs, as can be recorded in the clinic, all clinical recordings. And clearly you need to be an expert to assign a particular clinical label to these epochs. And this is essentially what we do in the clinic and have been doing for almost over a century, since about 1904. And this is the current clinical practice. So a lot of EEGs are made annually. In the Netherlands, about 250,000 for different conditions ranging from coma to neurological disorders, as sleep disturbances, epilepsy. And the clinical practice, the routine clinical practice is that all these are assessed by visual analysis by experts, in particular neurologists and clinical neurophysiologists. Now, clearly this takes a long time to do. We are not present 24/7, and the learning curve is also quite steep. So it really takes a long time to acquire this skill. The reason that this is still the current practice is essentially that our visual system is extremely well developed to recognize all these different patterns. You immediately recognize these people within a few hundred milliseconds. And that is one of the major reasons that visual assessment of the EEG, the gold standard, is still the visual assessment by the experts. However, since about 10 to 15 years, we have been able to use other techniques, in particular deep learning, at least that is promising to assist in this process. This is two images from a paper published a couple of years ago, where the caption that is below the images has been generated by a computer, not ever having seen these pictures before. And this was something that people thought was impossible to do for computers for about 10 to 15 years ago. But if you read the caption, this is very similar to what a human being would state if asked to say what is on the picture. Now, if this is possible, we argued, then it must be possible to have a similar procedure to classify EEG recordings. And when we started a couple of years ago, we thought maybe it's nice to start with a ground truth scenario just to see how well deep nets can classify EEG epochs. So our initial attempt was to use EEG recordings from males and females and to ask a particular deep net architecture, or train it such, to see if it could differentiate EEGs from males from females. So we trained a deep net with many EEGs, and this is an example, and part of these are from males and part of these are from females. It's impossible to differentiate even by an expert. But indeed, after training, the computer was able to classify these EEGs. And if you want to know which one belonged to male and which ones of these belong to the female, then I can recommend you to read this paper, because that contains the answer to this question. And indeed, we can classify EEGs from males from females with an accuracy of more than 80%. Now, this was very stimulating, and at present, we are mainly exploring the use of deep nets for two clinical conditions, and one is the outcome prediction in patients in coma after resuscitation treated in the ICU, and the other application relates to diagnostics in epilepsy. And we have shown, and many others, that the EEG is very relevant to assist in coma outcome prediction, as assessed by visual analysis. And for people who are not familiar with epilepsy, this is a very small video of a patient in an epilepsy monitoring unit suffering from generalized seizures. On the right, you see the EEG, and in a few seconds, you will see the start of a generalized seizure. And we very much often rely on history taking for the diagnosis of epilepsy, and we very often use the EEG for the assessment of epilepsy, exploring intra-ictal discharges. So two important applications, outcome prediction of coma and diagnostics in epilepsy. And Caterina Lorenzo will further discuss some details of how we approach this with our clinical EEG recordings. So now I give the floor to Caterina.
Okay, so now talking a little bit about prognostication in postsynaptic coma, of course with deep learning. What we did was taking data from almost 1,000 patients from 5 different medical centers, and we split this into an internal and an external set. And in the internal one, we split it further into training and validation with cross-validation and a test set. And this data looks somewhat like this. So you can see here we have several EEG epochs. Some of them are in green, some of them are in red. So the green ones are associated with patients that had a good outcome, so that recovered. And the ones in red, they are associated with patients that had poor outcome. And what we did was we used this raw EEG data, we just took it as it is, and we trained a PGG architecture that you can see here This is a deep neural network. A lot of you probably know it from the literature. It is widely used in image analysis, and that was the one that we used in this project as well. We got some results. Here you can see after 12 hours starting from cardiac arrest, you can see on the left what our human experts said, and on the right what the machine actually said. And for prediction of poor outcomes, so the patients that do not recover, we actually had a better sensitivity than the human experts. And for a good outcome, we had approximately the same. So we were in a good path with this. And then we have another and newer application in the detection of interictal epileptiform discharges. So the thing with this one is to diagnose epilepsy, we usually use periods of EEG that are not related to when the patients are having seizures. And this is because seizures do not happen all the time. They're very sporadic and very spontaneous. So we usually don't have ictal EEGs, so EEGs for seizures. And we refer to other EEGs to do this. And what we look to is this interictal epileptiform discharges that are marked in blue here. And now experts detect them visually, but of course you can see that it's a very cumbersome work. So again, we got some data, in this case from healthy subjects and also from patients with generalized focal epilepsy. We did some minimal preprocessing, and just like in the last case, we used raw EEG for this, so no further frequency processing or anything. We just fed the network with 2 seconds of EEG, and with all of our data, of course, we did 5-fold cross-validation. We split it into training and testing, and we saw what happened. And the thing with this further is that we were not sure if we had enough data, because we need a large volume of data for deep learning. We were not sure if we had enough discharges. And this is because, of course, since we are not using data from seizures, the abnormalities in the epileptic EEG are not that common. So there are not a lot of IEDs in our epileptic EEG. So to solve this, we tried some data augmentation techniques, namely changing the order of the EEG channels and also shifting its time a little bit. So I will show you what that looks like. Here you can see the same EEG epoch in 3 different configurations. And here you can see also what happens when we get an EEG epoch and we shift it in time a little bit. So on the top panel, you can see that we add some novel context, and on the bottom, you can see that we have new IEDs being included in the data. And with all of this, we trained a network and again, a VGG architecture, and we got some nice power seekers as well. And we reached 96% sensitivity at 99% sensitivity, which we were happy about. But then the question was, is this actually a good result? So is the network detecting what we wanted to detect? Is it looking at IEDs? And yes, it is. We applied a visualization technique called occlusion, and you can see here that indeed, if we give the network a sample, it can tell us exactly where the IED is. And if we shift the sample in time, it can still tell us where the IED is. And if we change the order of the channels, it is still possible to tell where it is, even though it looks quite different from one montage to the other. So indeed, we were able to say and to conclude that our network was properly trained, and we can show also the clinicians that our approach is valid and is detecting something that is valuable for them in the diagnosis of epilepsy. And now I will give the floor back to Michel.
Yes, just a few concluding slides. So what is the clinical status of this work that has been done in collaboration not only with Katharina, but also Jeanette Hofmeijer and Marleen Kloostermans and some other students as well, At present, we have a prototype of the AI algorithm in our clinical EEG monitor. So all the parameters of the deep net have been implemented, and we can show a trend curve of patients after cardiac arrest, showing the probability of a good neurological outcome updated on frequent hours after cardiac arrest. So that's the status of the AI for the coma outcome prediction. And as we speak, we are implementing a prototype as well, alongside the system we use for the visual assessment for the detection of the interictal discharges in patients who may suffer from epilepsy. So in closing, the EEG it's a very rich source of information in the clinic, having been used for almost a century. And we think that deep learning will be disruptive in this sense in the next decade or so, that it will significantly assist and maybe even replace in the near future part of the routine we thought was typically human. Well, thank you very much, and this ends our talk, and we're happy to answer questions, of course.
Great, thanks Michel and Katarina. So if I may ask you to stop sharing your screen indeed, and invite Kiki and Esmee also on stage to see if we have any questions from the attendees that we can discuss.
Indeed. Maybe Esmee, you can introduce yourself shortly so people know what they can ask you about.
Hi, I'm Esmee Stoop. I'm a data scientist at the LUMC. I primarily are working on creating on AI for clinical practices, validating as well, so as to speed up the whole process of making AI into using it in the clinic.
Great. So we've got some different questions coming in during the talk. So let's start with some specific ones, and then maybe we can follow up with a more general discussion on the implementation of data science and AI in healthcare. So let's first get back to Bas. We've got a question for you, some technical ones to start with. The data set that you are using for the prediction of the hospitalization, how large was it? And did you split it in a train and a validation and a test set?
Yeah, there are approximately 180,000 emergency department patients in three hospitals and 3 years, and approximately 100 to 200 variables were registered per patient. And the variation depends on how complex the patient is. For example, a patient with an ankle sprain, we don't do any blood testing there, only request an X-ray of the ankle. And for example, in a patient with sepsis, we also have data on all sorts of blood tests, CRP, leukocytes, lactate, creatinine, and things like that. And we did and as you also do in deriving and validating logistic regression models, we did a training set of 2/3 of the patients and then a test set in 1/3 of the patients.
Do you expect it to also work in other hospitals? If you, of course, now you have the same data set that you applied it on for the training.
Yeah, we did some cross validations among the hospitals in the data set, and we saw, well, one hospital was a little bit less in the terms of the predictive performance, but on overall the predictive performance was similar among hospitals, and at least always over an area on the curve of 0.8, and good calibration.
I think that's quite impressive, because I think it's a real problem, right? That you see there's a lot of these kind of models that are trained on a hospital reality. Are not that easily transferable to another clinic. So the fact that you show that,
we have now 3 hospitals, so and they are quite similar, although in one a little less, but this is, well, negligible, I think. Of course, when the other hospitals are also have their automatic connection available, we can validate it in all the 12 emergency departments and get more insight whether or not the external validation of the prediction models.
Another pretty good question I think we got from Arnoud. That you showed the different AUCs, so the performance of the models. But what does this have of a clinical value? So what is the action you can take? What is the consequences? And can you express that in some sort of metric or measure? How can you measure it really improves healthcare?
Yeah, no, very good question. We are in the middle of that, but we have some preliminary data. I think for clinical practice, it's very simple. You need a good positive predictive value or a good or high negative predictive value. And the positive predictive value is what we did is test how many patients had a cutoff value in the models, which resulted in a 90% positive predictive value. Because, well, we thought that you need at least like 90% positive predictive value to be valuable in clinic. Only, well, 10 to 15% had those values. So when you want to predict who is going to be hospitalized, the present models are, well, disappointing, you could say. When you look at it,
so you're only certain for a very small percentage. Can I?
Yes, exactly, for 10% of the group. When you look at the negative predictive value, we did the same thing, and that is a little bit more hopeful. There we found that 45% have a negative predictive value of are below the cutoff of 90% negative predictive value. So there I see some possibilities, but this is, well, we hoped for better. And I think what we should now do is to see whether the machine learning algorithms will become better when we have more data in it. There are some systematic reviews specifically for ED questions, and they showed that the more patients you put in your model, the better the machine learning algorithms become, but not the conventional logistic regression. So maybe there we can improve the machine learning models. I think the most important question that should be answered is whether or not this machine learning models or the logistic model, regression model, has additional value over clinical judgment, and we did not yet assess that. And I think that's the real question.
That's interesting to indeed research. If you're going to ask all these doctors, like, what do you think? Is this person going to be hospitalized or not? Yeah. Also, something that's not registered already, like it's not data that you have, right? There's no.
Well, we not in the whole data sets, but we are thinking of some study in a subset of sepsis patients where we found a way to discriminate clinical judgment from the machine learning algorithm performance. So I'm very curious how that will be, but I don't have the answers yet.
All right, just one more question for you, a quick one that I got from Christina and from Jorrit is, what are the most important features that contribute to prediction? Have you seen it?
Yeah, well, as mentioned in my presentation, I can tell you that about the logistic regression analysis. That's very easy for doctors to understand. You get an output file with all the variables which have the highest odds ratios. I don't know for the machine learning algorithms, especially not for the neural network. But for the logistic regression, it's mainly a triage category, and I have them here on my other screen, so I'm looking at the other screen right now. But the highest effect have the triage category, whether or not a doctor is requesting a consultation of another doctor, and for the 2-hour model, whether or not fluid resuscitation, whether or not there has been administered a large amount of fluids. And we know that the patients who receive a lot of fluids are also the sickest patients and the non-responders. And that's for the 2-hour model. Of course, the fluid resuscitation is not in the 30-minute model, which is timed before you start ED treatment. But in the 30-minute model, it's mainly triage category and the vital signs. And also the presenting complaints. For example, when you come in with a algehele malaise in Dutch, or feeling unwell in English, that gives a high probability for hospital admission.
Great. So I hope that answered the question of Christina and Jorrit. Then let's dive into the second talk from Michel and Katarina. Thank you for your story. One question I'm also curious about when it got asked was, where I got it, Nicolas. Oh yeah, so when you did the study about the different sex, so male and female differentiation of the EEG, what does the neural network look at? Have you looked at that? Have you discovered patterns? Because you said, like, as a doctor, as a physician, it's impossible to see. With hindsight, could you figure out what the neural network saw, what the differences were?
Yeah, we paid a little bit attention to the feature discovery by looking into particular layers of the network. And that was mainly contributing from a sector author, Sebastian Olbrich. But apparently the beta rhythms or frequencies in the beta range, so between 13 to 18.
Can you sit a bit closer, Michel, again?
Oh yeah, sorry, I will do it again. So
yeah, this is a lot better. Yeah, yeah.
Okay,
Stay close
yes,
to the camera.
I'm almost eating the computer now, or the microphone, but that's okay.
Perfect.
So the beta frequencies between 13 to 18, 19 hertz, apparently they are important. They contain, at least in those frequency bands, there are features that are relevant to distinguish between males and females. We didn't go into all the details of the that are still possible for feature discovery and explainable deep learning, because it was not the primary goal of the paper. But apparently females have interesting information in the beta frequency range. That's what I can tell at this moment from that work.
So I'm still really curious about what that says about us females, or what that says about females.
There is some literature about empathy and emotion and a larger amount of beta. Yeah.
Just a question came in right after we discussed this from Shirin. So what's the motivation behind even doing something like that and classifying between male and female? Does it have any clinical relevance?
Well, I think potentially it has, but the primary motivation was basically twofold. First, we wanted to have a ground truth scenario, because the problem with many other clinical EEG patterns is that we still have to rely on the clinical expert. And this case is XY or XX chromosome. So at least that part is pretty certain. And we were wondering if the computer could find differences beyond the human assessment. So it basically illustrates, I think, the power of a particular deep net in this particular case. In principle, of course, it could contribute to gender issues or particular treatments related to that. But that was not the primary goal of this work. Yeah,
it was a good trial case to see, to demonstrate the power of deep learning, I guess.
Yes, indeed. Yeah.
Another more technical question. You used the VGG model, which is more of an image architecture, right? You're gonna change the seat. Very good. Stay close to the mic, okay?
Yes.
Yeah. The question is if you also used recurrent neural networks instead of more of the imaging architectures, and if you saw any differences with that.
Well, for prognostication in post-traumatic coma, that was not really our focus, because we were using EEG a certain amount of time after cardiac arrest, so we were not using samples that were temporally correlated. But for epilepsy, there is one of our previous works indeed tried to compare RNNs to CNNs, and what we found was that the performance of a CNN, which in that case was not PGG, it was a simpler model, it was still better than the RNN. But we did not exclude that type of approach in the future. We still have to look at it again.
Mm-hmm. So just to give some context to maybe the not deep learning experts, the recurrent neural networks are mostly used for time sequences. So if we consider these brain signals, there are of course also time sequences. So many people would quickly rely or think about these recurrent neural networks instead of networks that you usually use for images. But this shows that also these images, you can also look at a signal as it is an image, right? So
exactly.
That's the approach you took. Very nice. So also a question for you, and it already starts also the discussion about implementation and how to adapt this clinically. You showed Michel and Katarina quickly that you use it already with some prototype bedside. How do you organize that? Is it something that you use as a physician already in your procedures for diagnostics or doing any actions? And how does that
I will again
work?
do
Yeah.
this.
And how does this work also, yeah, regulatory wise? And can you just use an algorithm like that in clinic?
No, not in the sense that it is completely clinically validated in the clinical context. So it's really a prototype. And the first question was, can we have it running on our system? And actually, this is only very recently started. So actually, we're still thinking about how to do a proper clinical assessment of the additional value. So we essentially still, we rely on the visual assessment according to the recently changed guidelines on prognostication of post-synaptic in the Netherlands. And this is completely complementary, but at present it's still in an experimental stage. Yeah.
So, Esme, you also work with a lot of algorithms within the hospital. You developed them partly, but also involved in this implementation process. How does that work in your situation? How do you go about getting these algorithms there where you want to use them?
So I guess we really start at the beginning. So, and it can either be someone comes to us with, hey, I saw this cool model and we want to implement it in the hospital, or hey, we have this problem, can you help us out and can we make a model? So it can start at looking at the data, see what we can do some proof of concepts, but also talking to the company who provides this model, validating that model. And that is where it comes together, right? So that's where we validate the model, see what it has of value for the clinic, if it even helps, or whether it makes a bigger problem, does it fit into the workflow of the physicians? So that's basically where we start, and from there we go on.
So here sometimes people say, like, about validation, that these algorithms are the new drugs. And of course, we know getting a drug on the market takes a lot of time and a lot of validation and a lot of studies and years and money, a lot of money as well. And usually what they do is randomized controlled trials. So a trial where you really look at, okay, one group doesn't get that pill or gets something else, and another group gets this new medication. If this is maybe a question for you, Esme, but also for the others, that how do you look at that? How do you see that? Is that a way that, should we compare algorithms to drugs in that sense, in how we validate them and how we go about them?
I think a little. I mean, I think we start first with using the model next to the physicians. So let the physicians do their work and see what the model says and how does that compare. And from there on, I think it's very likely that we will go into randomized trials. Yeah.
And Bas, how do you?
I think this is one of the most neglected steps in clinical practice, to be honest. Also, with the additional value of biomarkers, there are too many studies developing new prediction models, clinical decision rules, and so on. And the step to clinical practice is often forgotten, and then people go on to the next topic. And we should really see what the beneficial effect is. So you need some sort of before-after quasi-experimental trial or a randomized controlled trial. May not always be possible, but you should at least try. And I think really, and when you do that, you may also discriminate the performance of the clinician compared to the machine learning model, because if they both perform the same, and you will do a randomized controlled trial, you will probably not find any beneficial effect of the machine learning algorithms. So that's, I think, an important step.
Yeah, well, I don't completely agree with the latter statement. I mean, if a deep net would perform on par with a clinician, that would be extremely beneficial, because you can use it 24/7, or on locations where there is no expert available. And I know a paper that was published, I think, 2 years ago, where dermatologists, 8 dermatologists classified skin lesions, and it was compared to a deep net, and the deep net was on par with the experts, which is fine, because then you can use your iPhone to make an image and have the deep net classified and advise whether or not to go to a GP. So I think similar performance is sufficient for several clinical applications. At the same time, I do agree that the assessment, it's not so trivial to really show in the clinic whether it's how useful it is. For the epilepsy, I think, and that's what we've done in the past with other machine learning algorithms, and we will do now with the deep net, you can have a panel of experts giving them like 50 EEGs, label all the abnormalities and compare it with the machine. And when it is similar, the performance, then I think you can in principle rely on the algorithms, at least to be of assistive value and maybe even to replace some of the experts.
No, I agree. That's and I would be most interested in the combination. How does an algorithm help the doctor? And of course, at least in the emergency department, it's also nice to know as a doctor, if you risk stratify, if the machine learning gives a similar impression of your feeling of the patient. That's also very reassuring.
Yeah,
that's true.
Yeah. Yeah. No, I agree. So you could have sort of a partner in crime in the good sense of the word.
Yeah.
You know,
Yeah.
A colleague that you can consult. And in this case, an in silico colleague.
Yeah.
And it could also point out if there is a difference, then you may go back as the clinician to the case and say, so where does this come from? And it can also assist in modifying your opinion. Yes, definitely.
Yeah.
Shall we go to one last?
Yeah, I think we should also look out like where you use the model. So, I mean, if you use it for physicians which are really experienced already, then I think it's fine. But if you use it with, and I think both parts of this has a say in this. So if you use it for beginning physicians, the thing is that it's possible that this starting doctor won't get to intuition for the patient or the data as much when he uses the model as when he doesn't use the model as much. So I think we also should think about those processes, like do we use it for everyone or not, or what those implications could be.
There you touch upon a nice ethical issue already, I think, with who's responsible for what, and the value might not be the same for everybody, as you mentioned as well. Like if it is on par, but on par with who? With the mean, or maybe is that a resident, or is that indeed a very experienced physician? I want to ask one more question, but I see it's already almost time. Ivo, do you want to wrap it up, or?
So I can give you one more minute.
Ooh, okay.
One.
Yeah, no, then I think I'm going to skip this one, because otherwise it will end up in a discussion if we enter this topic of finance and regulation. So it's not a quick answer. So maybe for next time.
Yeah, that's a good cliffhanger, a good reason to organize another series of this meetup. So I want to thank all the speakers and all the attendees big time to join us in this edition. It was really exciting. I'm going to send instructions on how to obtain the recording through meetup.com. Some more marketing from deeplearning.ai. They make this course AI for Medicine, which is on Coursera, I think. And if you enter some data in these forms on these URLs that I put there, then you get a 50% discount. I will also send this after the event. You can also see here some more information about the LUMC CAIRELab and the research group, of the meetup group. These are my data. I want to thank the sponsors, Mobiquity and GoDataDriven, and of course deeplearning.ai and LUMC for organizing it together with us. And yeah, we expect to do other editions in September at Chipsoft, and in December at the new office of Mobiquity in Amsterdam. So stay tuned. And last but not least, may I also thank Charlotte van Leeuwen to partner up with me in organizing this on behalf of the LUMC. Could not have done it without you. And thanks again, and see you all next time. Bye-bye.
Bye. Thanks all.
Bye.
Bye. Thank you.